I don't believe in luck. Not the good kind. Anyway, when people say things happen for a reason, they're usually trying to wrap misery in a softer cloth, as if purpose makes pain easier to swallow. But most of the things I've lived through never made much sense, and I learned early that waiting for justice was just another form of standing still. Still, I tried my best to move through the world with decency. Maybe it was how I was raised. Maybe it was the only thing I had left to offer. I cleaned rooms at the Alden House Hotel and sorted old novels in the evenings at Bluebell Books, a shop that smelled of dust and lemon polish. My days were stitched together by small routines: peppermint tea at 6 a.m., 3 stops on the 103 bus, cracked palms from detergent, and the relief of pages whispering between my fingers at night. It was at the bookshop that I found it, the wallet. Someone had left it sitting near the register after we closed. It was pale grey leather, soft as suede, and thick with cards and folded bills. It had the weight of someone who never had to check their balance before a meal. I held it like it might burn me. Inside, the name read, Frances Everly. Yes, that Frances Everly, Society columns, founder of Everly Interiors, known for her collection of high-profile lawsuits and lower-profile staff complaints. Her face was always blurred in gossip features, not out of privacy, but power. I'd seen her name in the paper just last week, seated next to someone who owned part of a vineyard in Spain. For a second, I stared at the wallet. I could have said nothing, slipped out the cash, left it in the drop box for someone else to deal with, or returned it anonymously. No risk, no name. I even imagined mailing it with no return address, just to be safe. But my hands wouldn't let me. I had this stubborn disease. My mother used to call it conscience with claws, and it wouldn't unclench. So the next morning, I took the early train uptown and walked into the lobby of Everly & Company, still wearing my worn coat and scuffed boots. The receptionist looked me up and down like I'd brought in a contagious rash. "Do you have an appointment?" "I found something that belongs to Ms. Everly." She arched a brow. "She doesn't see walk-ins." "I won't stay. I just need to hand this over." I held up the wallet. There was a pause, and then I was told to wait. 10 minutes later, a tall, silver-haired woman stepped out of the elevator. Her face was sharper in real life, not cruel, but carved. When her eyes met mine, something inside me flinched. Not in fear, in recognition. Of class. Of difference. Of how invisible I must have looked to her. Still, she approached. "That's mine," she said, without a thank you. I handed it over. She opened it, checked everything inside. Then she looked at me again. "You could have kept it." "I didn't." She pulled out a wad of bills, separated 200s, and held them out. "Take it." I shook my head. "That's not why I brought it back." She stared like I'd spoken a foreign language. "Don't be ridiculous. You earned it." "No, Mum," I said softly. "It wasn't mine." She didn't press. She only nodded once, slowly, like I was a curiosity in a museum. Then she turned and walked away without another word. I walked back to the station in the cold. I couldn't feel my fingers, but my heart was strangely calm. I hadn't been expecting gratitude. People like her didn't give it. But I'd done the right thing. For me. For the version of myself I still wanted to believe in. Still, I can't lie. When rent was late 2 weeks later and the bookstore cut my hours, I did think about that money. I thought about the look she gave me. I thought about the silence she left me with. Kindness, I've learned, rarely makes noise. But it never goes missing. Not forever. And sometimes, just sometimes, the world remembers where you left it. I lost my job at the hotel 3 weeks after I returned the wallet. They didn't say it was about the layoffs. They said it was about attitude, about fitting in, about team harmony. But what they really meant was that I was too quiet to be liked, too black to be unseen, too poor to be heard. The bookstore followed not long after. Business was slow, and the owner's son had just come home from university with a passion for vintage things, which apparently included my job. I handed over my apron without tears. When I told my landlord I'd be late on rent, he said nothing for 3 days. Then a typed notice appeared under my door. He was selling the house. I had 30 days to leave. I packed my life into 2 suitcases and 1 old backpack. It wasn't hard. You learn not to gather too much when you've lived most of your life making room for other people's needs. I slept in shelters for a while. Not the kind that smell like rotten prayers, but the quieter ones, old church halls and low-rent spaces where no one looked you in the eye unless they needed something. I washed my face in cracked sinks and smiled like I still had a home to return to. I tried to find work, anything. But a woman like me, with calloused hands and no connections, is always too much and never enough. Sometimes I thought about Frances Everly. Not in bitterness. Not even with hope. Just a flicker. The image of her hand, holding that money out like I was meant to take it. Like it was obvious I'd want it. But I never regretted saying no. Not even once. Because here's the thing people don't understand. Dignity doesn't feed you, but it keeps you from starving inside. One rainy evening, I found a part-time overnight position listed for a discreet, responsible assistant at a private retreat center outside the city. The pay wasn't much, but it came with a room and 2 meals a day. I applied. I didn't dare hope. When they called me in for a short interview, I wore my neatest blouse and the old coat that still held the faint scent of lemon oil. The man who met me at the gates didn't ask too many questions. He liked that I didn't talk too much. He said, "People who listen are rare. That's useful here." The place was remote, all stone pathways and tangled ivy, a former estate turned creative sanctuary for select guests. Writers, artists, thinkers. I was told to keep quiet, clean up, and not ask for autographs. I said yes to everything. That first night, I sat in my small attic room and stared out the window at the trees. I was warm. I had food. I had silence that didn't ache. It was enough. For a while. But then, on a sharp blue morning in early March, I walked into the front sitting room to dust the mantels. And there she was. Frances Everly. Seated by the fire. Her silver hair swept up, her coat folded neatly beside her. She was holding a mug with both hands, as if absorbing its warmth into her bones. And when she looked up, her eyes met mine. She blinked. I froze. Recognition was slow, like a shutter clicking open in her mind. Her lips parted slightly. She stood, not with shock, but something quieter. Something unreadable. She didn't speak. Neither did I. I left the room quietly, my pulse crashing in my ears. That night, she sent for me. And everything changed. I thought about pretending I was someone else. Maybe she wouldn't remember me clearly. Maybe I'd changed enough. Thinner, older, more tired around the eyes. But when the assistant came with the message that Ms. Everly requests to see you privately, I knew. She remembered. I walked down the long corridor toward the library. Every step echoed. I hadn't been summoned before, not by a guest, and certainly not by someone like her. She stood near the window, back to me. The light filtered through the sheer curtains, washing her face in a glow that felt too soft for someone with a reputation like hers. She turned, slow and deliberate. "You're the girl from the bookshop," she said. "The one who returned my wallet." I nodded. She looked at me for a long time. I thought she was going to ask how I'd ended up here. Ask if I regretted refusing the money. But she didn't. She just said, "I never forgot that." I didn't know what to say. She gestured to the chair opposite her. "Sit. Isala. That's your name, yes." I nodded again. My voice had lodged somewhere behind my ribs. She watched me carefully, like I was a page she hadn't finished reading. "Do you know why I'm here?" she asked. "No," I said honestly. "I'm on sabbatical," she said, a trace of exhaustion brushing her words. "A nervous thing, the doctors called it. Burnout. I haven't been able to design, or direct, or even sleep properly. So my assistant booked this place. Said I needed quiet." She looked around the room, then back at me. Funny, isn't it? I come here for silence and find the only person whose voice I never heard but remember clearly. I lowered my eyes. I'm just a worker here. She tilted her head. That may be what they wrote on your contract. But I think there's more. Then she stood and walked to the writing desk in the corner. On it sat a black leather folder. Elegant, pristine. I read something yesterday, she said. It was left in the communal reading pile. A short story. About a woman who worked in other people's homes until she couldn't bear to be unseen anymore. It was quiet. Sharp. Devastating, really. My heart jerked. The story. I had left it there weeks ago, folded between old journals. I never thought anyone would read it. She turned, holding the paper. Did you write this? I hesitated. The lie rose easily. No, but I couldn't let it out. Yes. Something flickered across her face. Surprise. Perhaps. Maybe shame. You've written more? She asked. I nodded. Sometimes. At night. Why haven't you shown anyone? I'm not the sort of person people expect to write things they want to read. She didn't argue. That, perhaps, was the most honest thing she ever did. I've rejected 10 writers this year, she said, quietly. Powerful ones. Names you'd recognize. Nothing moved me. Nothing cut deep. She tapped the paper. But this? This haunted me. I said nothing. She crossed to the desk again, opened her bag, and pulled out something else, a folded envelope with her embossed letterhead. I don't know what your plans are, Isala, but I'd like to offer you something. When I didn't move, she placed it on the table between us. I know you didn't return that wallet to gain anything. That's what makes this right. I didn't open it. Instead, I said the only thing I knew for sure. I didn't do it because I thought someone would remember. I did it because I didn't want to forget who I was. Her expression softened in a way I hadn't thought possible. I envy that, she said. More than you know. And for the first time, I saw it, not just power or poise, but loneliness behind her ribs. The kind that can't be softened by money. She left quietly. That night, I opened the envelope. It wasn't cash. It was a letter of recommendation. A contact in publishing. A fellowship application already half-filled. A gentle push toward the light I'd almost convinced myself didn't exist. I held the pages with both hands. And for the first time in years, I cried. Not from pain, but possibility. I didn't rush. For once, I let the world come to me. I filled out the fellowship form slowly, unsure if the words sounded real. I wasn't used to writing about myself. Not like this. Not with hope in the room. Frances didn't push. She nodded whenever we passed, sometimes left books outside my door with little notes. Page 47, this line reminded me of yours. It felt like a strange, respectful mentorship. Not loud, not performative, but intentional. Human. I sent in a few of my stories. Stories I'd scribbled on napkins and grocery receipts. Stories I didn't know were aching to be read. 3 weeks later, an email arrived. Accepted. Full residency. With stipend. They said my voice was precise and devastating, that my characters lived beyond the page, that someone had recommended me with glowing urgency. I didn't need to guess who. The retreat manager printed the email out and handed it to me in an envelope, just like the first one. You're going to have to leave us, he said with a smile that didn't feel patronizing. But only because you've got somewhere better to be. I found Frances by the lake that afternoon. She was sitting with a scarf wrapped around her shoulders, eyes closed in the breeze. I got in, I said quietly. She opened her eyes and smiled, not with surprise, but something gentler. I'm glad, she said. You belonged somewhere else from the beginning. I sat next to her. Neither of us spoke for a while. The birds made more noise than we did. You know, she said, when I first saw you at the bookshop, I was in the middle of ending a deal with a company that wanted to rebrand me. They said my image was out of touch, that I needed to be louder, sharper, more visible. She paused. Then you handed me my wallet and said no to money, and I thought, God, maybe they're right. Maybe I don't see people anymore. I didn't know what to say. So she continued, you reminded me of something I used to believe, that dignity is its own kind of brilliance. You gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost. I looked at her, not the powerhouse Frances Everly from the design world, but the woman beside me, the one with crow's feet and a voice that sometimes shook in the wind. I didn't do it to be remembered, I said. She smiled. And that's exactly why I remembered. We didn't become friends. Not exactly. But when I left the retreat a week later, she hugged me. Brief, firm, and real. The fellowship opened doors I didn't know existed. By the end of the year, I had a short story published in a literary journal. The year after that, I signed a 2-book deal. They called me a quiet revelation, a voice from the margins that can no longer be ignored. Book clubs, panels, awards I didn't even know existed. I stood on stages where no one had ever invited someone like me before. And every time I looked out into the crowd, I thought of the girl folding towels in the back room. The girl who said no, not out of pride, but principle. A year later, I walked into a bookstore for my first solo signing event. The place was packed. People carried copies of The Weight of Quiet, things like it mattered to them. A young woman pressed her copy into my hands and whispered, "Your words made me feel seen." And there, near the back of the room, standing alone, arms folded, was Frances Everly. She didn't wave, didn't make a scene, just gave me a slow nod. I nodded back. That night, she sent me flowers. No card. None needed. Sometimes, the world will not clap when you do right. Sometimes, the ones you love will watch you shrink and call it grace. But dignity is not noise. And kindness is not weakness. It may take the long road, but it always finds its way back. Not to reward you, but to remind you. You were never invisible. You were simply ahead of being seen. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that inspire, challenge, and stay with you.